Thanks for tuning in. I'm joined today by Gareth, the MD of Distill Ventures, Heineken on-trade category controller Andy Wingate, and David Burgess, who is the co-founder of Fugitive Motel in London. Thanks for joining us today, guys. I think I'd like to start off by talking about how before COVID, the conversation around low to no was all about growth. The predictions for future share of the market, what value the category could eventually achieve, it seemed like the sky was the limit. Is that still the case? And has coronavirus changed its prospects at all?
Certainly from our perspective, don't get me wrong, and I wouldn't want to underplay the impact of COVID-19, but it's a road bump as opposed to a significant course change. Certainly everything we've seen, the research we've done, pubs have been missed. When you talk to consumers, friends, family, and then pubs are the three things in that order that they've missed most. And going to the pub, you saw it when pubs could reopen before the additional restrictions came in. The recovery actually was pretty positive. Like, don't get me wrong, there was obviously a reduction in footfall, but it was moving in positive directions and really driving that. And there was nothing to suggest that no and low wasn't gaining to some extent its fair share of that. Added into that, the need to be healthy has never been greater. All the macro trends driving people towards moderation as a category, towards no and low as a benefit, are absolutely valid, if not more so, in this time when our awareness of health trends and everything has been massively heightened. So yeah, certainly we see a really positive future. Obviously it's tough at the moment, and equally with people generally drinking more locally, that takes cars out of the equation, and that driving occasion, which is not necessarily being the big growth driver in no and low alcohol, but has been the base of the market, that's been diminished. And so whilst you're still seeing growth because the strength of that consumer trend is really powerful, the market has been hit, and possibly harder than some of the alcohol containing categories in the on-trade. But certainly when the pubs come back anything like normal, certainly our expectation is that the beautiful future that everyone was predicting for no and low as a category is absolutely still there, and it's a short to medium term bump rather than a long term change in the predictions for the marketplace.
That's really interesting to me, because I think certainly a lot of the media coverage around the pandemic was, booze sales are going through the roof, Brits are drinking more than ever, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, David, what's your experience of this been? Is the demand for low and no drinks of customers coming to Fugitive Motel, is that still there?
The trend has been really interesting. So as a central London operator, as an independent, and in the spirit of survival, we very quickly after the March compulsory lockdown diversified our income streams, obviously having to close our doors, and we introduced a drinks delivery service to East and North London. So a next day drinks delivery service that we were getting out there with. And the first few weeks, do you remember the weather being really good? For sure, April, early May, people were drinking a lot, and it was alcohol led for sure. But Fugitive Motel obviously has a name for a really good range of low and no alcohol products. And as kind of May wore on and into June, the sales of low and no in our takeaway offering really increased, markedly increased. That was for sure. And I think that's the consumer trend of everybody was sat at home, they'd probably overdrunk, and were maybe discovering low and no alcohol products that they perhaps didn't even know existed for the first time, because in normal months they would have gone to the pub and probably had an alcoholic drink in many cases. So there was definitely a trend. We definitely saw a trend in our takeaway business of rising low and no sales the longer the lockdown went on, for sure.
Can I just chime in on that first point, because you're saying the stories about Britons drinking heavily during the start of lockdown, and when you look at the off-trade data, the off-trade picked up something like 2/3 of, or somewhere between a half and 2/3 of that on-trade volume. But that does mean the average consumer was drinking significantly less in that respect. The difference, I think, really is you see all of your alcohol consumption in your recycling bin when you put it out once a week, whereas in normal circumstances, half of that is going to a recycling bin in a pub somewhere. And so I think David's interpretation would make sense, because people are suddenly starting to realise how much they were drinking, and that would then create some sort of reaction back into, actually, there's some really great options without the alcohol, and allowing me to moderate through that.
Sure.
You can see it in, so you could see it in claim data as well at the time, Andy, which is sort of, I think, kind of 50% saying they're drinking the same, you know, where they're buying it from, different, 25% saying drinking a bit more, 25% saying drinking a bit less was the kind of claim data. And so you kind of net effect was, you know, was probably in reality different to the headlines.
I mean, Gareth, one of the questions that I'd ask you is, you know, obviously with sales in hospitality, you know, significantly falling, does, you know, for brand owners and suppliers, does there become more of an emphasis on retail then, you know, and can retail make up for the drop in hospitality? Because as I understand it, you know, it's not as profitable.
But it's fascinating because, you know, at Distill, we, you know, specialise in the spirits end of non-alc and low and low, and that side of category is still really nascent. It's still really young, and lots of these new brands that might only be 12 months old at the most had a line of sight on the on-premise, on the hospitality sector, in which to start learning about their audience, about their consumers and their tribe, and bringing through the drinks experience. It's that those two areas of consumer education and drinks experience that would traditionally be the on-premise and hospitality sector would play such a key role in, that presented like a real challenge for many brands. But at the same point, these brands are led by incredibly dedicated, passionate founders, you know, incredibly determined founders that were able, because they didn't have a big channel base that they were then reliant on to, I hate to use the word because it feels overused over the past 8 months, but pivot. You know, these brands were switching their point of focus very, very quickly, and very, very effectively, be that into physical retail or be that into online, you know, through a direct to consumer offer or an Amazon offer. And from a non-alc spirits point of view, you know, the points that Andy was making of that kind of ongoing lifestyle and choice consumer trend continuing to be incredibly relevant, that was playing out in terms of category performance. The category from the start of the year to the middle of August, non-alc spirits grew 19% through Nielsen off premise, and the bulk of that from lockdown, kind of 65-70% of that from lockdown. So and equally, actually, I think you see in excess of 20 new brand launches in non-alc spirits over that period of time. And so I think, you know, what that really is showing is that, look, yes, we would love to be able to do the things that we do with consumer education and brand experience in the on-premise, that only the on-premise can do the way it does. Yeah, the brands that we work with would love and look forward to the point when they can bring that back into the channel mix and the activation plan. But at the moment, they're finding really, really innovative, creative ways of talking to consumers and using, be it physical or online retail, to then get product to drinkers.
And one of the things I've noticed, and we'll stay on the topic of low and no spirits for the moment, is because, you know, the way I see it, low and no beer and low and no wine are well established. You know, they've been going on for years. There's lots of big brands in those spaces. Low and no spirits, one of the things that's happened, especially over the past few months, is I've started to notice bigger alcoholic brands launching non-alcoholic versions of their drinks. What do you make of this, and what does it mean for the future, and especially what does it mean for those smaller, you know, challengers who might not have the same access to funding or the same route to market as already established alcohol producers?
Can I jump on that one if I can, Daniel? Because you know, from a Distill point of view, we're actually really excited about what the role of big brands coming into the category can play. And I'd reference to an extent beer, on this, in a category that, yes, it's been around for a lot longer, but was pretty stagnant and then had lots of pretty negative connotations and associations with it. And then in recent years, be it through craft breweries bringing innovation and product quality to the forefront, or big brands with big investment. Heineken putting kind of a third of its global marketing spend against 0.0, that does something pretty significant to the category. What it what it helps and encourages retailers to do is give the physical space on the fixture to the category, within which then you need to occupy the different consumer needs. You need different brands then across that category fixture space to tick the different consumer needs, of which there are many. It be that within beer or within non-alc spirits, and we're kind of really looking forward to some of these bigger brand names, and what we've seen, Salcombe, we've seen Warner Edwards. There's rumours of big brands like Grey Goose coming. That presents something really exciting for the category to accelerate even further from a growth point of view, and create space actually for some of these smaller innovative brands to really excel.
Sure.
Can I just build on that for a second, if I may? Yeah, I completely echo, and that's certainly where we see Heineken. The biggest success of Heineken 0.0 coming into the market has been, if you look at that market, so in the year up until lockdown, to make a reasonably clean picture for the on-trade, Heineken 0.0 grew by 10 million quid in terms of retail sales, 10 million pounds retail sales, and the market as a whole grew by significantly more than 10 million. The benefit, don't get me wrong, there was a massive positive tailwind in terms of trends and things, but the comms campaigns and as Gareth said, the light that we can shine on the market, showing that it's an innovative market, and that the amazing stuff that Brewdog are doing in that space, that lots of different craft brewers are bringing out, and you're just seeing a proliferation. The historic cask ale broad Go Ship 0.5 and things. There's lots of innovative things, and it gives everyone space, because suddenly it becomes a talking point rather than the dusty bottle that sits in the back of your fridge and sells a couple of units a week to one guy who drives. It was bringing everything to the fore, and I think big brands give ATL budgets, if nothing else, and so it gives the category some focus.
David, as someone who's you're buying these drinks, you've got limited space on the bar. You've got to be quite meticulous and quite myopic with what you stock. With such a proliferation of choice and new brands, what is it about a non-alcoholic drink that's going to make it stand out to you as an operator now?
Brand is key for sure. East London, where we're based, consumers are discerning everywhere, aren't they? But the consumers we see in our place are typically quite a young demographic, young professionals working and living in the East London area, and brand plays such an important role, both across our non-alcoholic beer sales and also our kombucha sales, another important part of the low and no category. There's a lot of variation across kombucha, but for us, what sells best, it's jar kombucha. Why is that? Because its packaging is superb, and consumers really resonate with it. So I guess answering the question, in terms of our products acquisition, we look at brand, and of course, as an independent operator, we have to look at price as well. That can be tricky, because a lot of the small craft breweries that are doing that are either really specialising in alcohol free, or they're a key part of their portfolio, that they can be look to be pushing quite punchy prices onto us, which then I take a real common sense approach with pricing with our consumers, and I don't. Honestly, I think there is a degree with some of the alcohol-free guys that they try and push pricing on a level of a premium alcohol product, and I don't think the majority of consumers are ready for that yet. I think there's still that mindset that, yes, sure, it's a craft product. Yes, sure, it still goes through the same processes, same brewing process, and more potentially in some cases. I just think there's still that mindset of the consumer expecting to pay slightly less, like a premium soft drink pricing perhaps, for an alcohol-free product.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would ask a broad question then, is pricing across the category at the right point, or does it need to change? Or is there not enough, is there too much variation in price for, shoppers to get a coherent sense of what they're paying for?
I think. Sorry, go on, Gareth.
No, go on, David.
I think it's getting there. I think it's getting there as probably consumer feedback loops back to these organisations. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what both Gareth and Andy think on that. Obviously, I'm saying that from an operator's side, and running the numbers, and making sure we meet our GPs and passing on a fair price to the customer. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys say from your sides, really.
Yeah, I think, look, price, but then again, this is probably a bit more non-out spirits than the sort of more established non-out beer category. Price becomes more relevant in terms of category flex when the roles of the brands and the role of the category is more established, and the segments within it have started to balance themselves out. Non-out spirits, as I say, is still very young. The greater risk here is liquid excellence. Than price. If it's technically, it's very difficult to make a non-out spirit in the same way it has been historically for non-out beer. Alcohol plays this phenomenal role as a stabilizer, as a preservative, but fundamentally it's a carrier of flavor and depth, and mouthfeel, and if a big brand entrance with a 7-figure above the line, comes in and creates awareness and trial for the non-out category, spirits category, for the first time, and that liquid excellence is not delivered, then you lose the consumer, long before you're worried about the price position of that. They just switch out, and so that is a category in its infancy. That's a fundamental challenge that we need to consider, and that's where DB really focus. Yes, we're looking at incredible founders, but we're looking at founders in non-out that have got technical expertise and determination to really accelerate the product credentials, the liquid credentials of the offering, so that when people come into it for the first time, they stay and they start to explore. And so that's when you then get into pricing elasticity and scope of that nature.
And Andy, you're talking to a lot of pubs on a regular basis, and I was wondering, in your opinion, what kind of share of bar could non-alcoholic achieve? Because at the moment, if I see it if I go into a pub and I see it on draft at all, it's usually about as much as one font and maybe a couple of bottles in the fridge. How much scope realistically is there to grow that?
I actually think it's a massive opportunity for the entree particularly, and simply because and we as Heineken are as bad as anyone. We'll stick a board outside a pub with Heineken badge on, and it tells everyone that this pub does Heineken, but realistically, Heineken 5%, normal Heineken, and realistically, that's telling people this is a pub, because every pub sells Heineken or something roughly similar to it. We'll sell one of the normal brands in general, and so you should use your signage, and equally that reflects into your overall merchandising plans to show the things which people don't necessarily know you have, and if you have a great no alcohol range, you should give it far more space than realistically, if you're going to line it up against in the fridge, if you're going to line up Heineken 0.0 against Heineken 5%, you want to give Heineken 5% 3 or 4 times more space because of the sheer throughput of volumes that those two beers have. More people drink alcohol than drink non-alcohol, but everyone is going in expecting that you're going to have some kind of 5% mainstreamish lager in your fridge.
Mm.
And so the excitement and the bit where you change consumers' perceptions about what that pub is relevant for, which occasions that pub is relevant for, is by talking about the things which you wouldn't necessarily expect. Any pub I go to is going to have a decent range of premium strength and standard strength lager on. So 5 years ago, you would talk about we've got craft beer, because that was something comparatively as a differentiator between pubs. Now, realistically, the majority of pubs have some kind of craft beer range, whether extensive or small. A few years ago, you would talk about we do Prosecco by the glass and things, because again, that would change the occasions that pub is relevant for.
Mm.
And switching gears into no alcohol, for years, coffee shops have been stealing the on-trade's lunch by catering for those occasions where you don't want to drink alcohol.
Mm.
And now the pub has an opportunity to take some of those occasions back. If they've got a cracking range of no alcohol beers, our recommendations, yeah, absolutely. As David pointed out, some brands are important, but the key thing for your range is to have some variation. Have a great mainstream well-known 0%, maybe have some craft beer with it, 0% within that, have a cider, have a couple of spirit options, maybe a kombucha if you're in the right marketplace for those sorts of things. But have a great range of no alcohol beer, far more than your sales merit as such. Promote it, highlight it, use that for your signage, because then you're going to grab some occasions far more than saying, hey everyone, we've got some mainstream lager on, because that's not telling anyone anything new. So you've got to focus on the bits of your range which are the interesting one, and change people's perceptions of where that pub is relevant.
I mean, David, does that chime with your experience? I mean, how much space, in your venue would you donate to, well, not donate, do you give to non-alcoholic options? How much do you promote it with customers?
We it's funny that the example earlier was used of the sort of the dusty bottle in the bottom of the fridge, because before we opened Fugitive Motel, we were always, part of the vision was always that we wanted that to not be the case. So Low and No, since we opened our doors 18 months ago, Low and No was always a key part of the product range of what we wanted to achieve with Fugitive Motel. And to answer your question, Low and No is really integrated into our product portfolio. So in our off sales area, we have a fridge that is for low and no alcohol. So we've got we've got a range of craft beers. We've got a range of ciders and kombuchas that goes really well for takeaway. And then on our actual back bar, which obviously is less relevant now. That's another challenge. It's less relevant because less people are coming up to the bar. But we absolutely, as Andy says, we do give it a good amount of space, so it draws attention and it draws the eye. And then I think it's as an operator, I think it's just about hitting those key kind of moments in the calendar. So we're already working for kind of learning from last year, where we had great partnerships with Lucky Saint and Liars in January. We're already working towards Dry January, this coming January, just because of how big it is in the calendar now. Obviously, we're in October, go sober for October. So yeah, I completely agree. Give it a good amount of space on the bar to draw attention to it, and also give it a good amount of space and signpost it well in your internal comms across your venue and your menus.
And what about non-alcoholic spirits? Because as Gareth says, they're quite new for a lot of consumers. How do you flag that? How do you introduce people who've never had a non-alcoholic spirit to non-alcoholic spirits?
What we've found successful so far is essentially, and I know there's a number of kind of thoughts on this. What we found easy to communicate with consumers, and I think that's one of the key first things to get through, isn't it? Is communicating easily over a busy bar or over busy table service. Is we have espresso martini, but we've also got espresso martini alcohol free, because in the consumer's head they know what an espresso martini is, and then they can go to that opposite product. So we found that type of product positioning has been successful. It is more challenging, definitely, when you're trying to explain a new non-alc spirit. Oh, well, what is it like? Well, what's it similar to? What is it that can be challenging, and then staff knowledge is so important.
Sure.
We did something in January, as I say, with Liars, so an Australian non-alc spirit group. I think personally, really great products, great branding, really good taste profiles, and that was really successful in January, and it carried on into February. Again, what I would say though, sort of reiterating the earlier point that I made, what was most successful, what was most popular was they've got a spirit that is a take on an American bourbon. So bourbon and Coke, or no bourbon and Coke, was really popular. Dark and stormy, I think they call it. It was really popular, and that's because just consumers could relate to it.
So it's about utilising things that they do understand to introduce something that they might not yet understand.
I think at this stage, yes, but I think that's why it's exciting, because the more, and again, the big players being in the market really help because it grows the awareness. But the more consumers have exposure to these products and these new drinks, the more they're going to be willing to try different things.
Sure. I'd really like to hear your predictions for the category, and not just in terms of, we've talked about growth and market share, but in terms of, flavours, trends. Are there areas of product development that aren't being hit where there is a real opportunity? Gareth, if we start with you.
It's such an interesting area at the moment with the volume of new entrants coming in the non-alc spirits space, and that kind of pace of innovation and creativity. It's a bit unknown, isn't it? Where this is going to go and what is going to stick from a consumer point of view. But what we're seeing, and I guess what we find particularly interesting from a consumer point of view, you've got these clear sub-segments forming. The kind of spirits replacement, where it's looking to mimic flavour and feels of traditional flavour and feel of spirits. We've got a brand like Ritual, using kind of all natural botanicals for a vodka, gin, and a tequila replacement, as an alternative, an analog. But then you see non-alc products designed that are really trying to create a completely new drinks experience, something like a Seedlip, some of the elixirs, some of the adaptogens, Three Spirit, these kind of brands, which, they're really, really fascinating, sort of functional non-alc spirit alternatives. And so they're really interesting to watch, how consumers respond to those. Yes, consumer growth and appetite, but I think it will be the sub-segmentation that becomes interesting over the next couple of years.
Andy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think certainly from a future perspective, and you see it with the proliferation within beer, which I think you said earlier has been quite a mature category, albeit without any interest. You're now seeing those consumer trends being capitalised on, and it's pretty much featuring in every single subsegment of beer or cider. That I do see in comparatively short term, every drinks category, every drinks option, and having a no alcohol, and David's example of espresso martini with alcohol or without alcohol being absolutely part of your repertoire. I see that being pretty much referenced across the entirety of your drinks range. And then obviously when you add in proper adult soft drinks, the sky's the limit in terms of flavors and trying different stuff. So yeah, I certainly think we'll get to a point where, and you see it from the market at the moment, that I'm now more demanding as a consumer than I have been in previous generations, previous years, previous generations. And I might be compromising my alcohol because of my alcohol intake, because I'm choosing to moderate, but I don't want to compromise anything else. So if this occasion is right for a gin and tonic, I want a no alcohol gin and tonic that looks amazing, is in a balloon glass with the right garnish, and everything about that serve is just as impressive as it would be if that was a Tanqueray or a Sipsmith G&T or however far you want to go up that chain. nothing is compromised just because it happens to not have alcohol. All the theatre is the same, because otherwise you're highlighting the fact that I'm getting something substandard, and that's where non-alcohol, I think, used to be, and is now not focused around that. There's no apology with it, and that's when no alcohol drinks can really flourish, and it gives you just an infinite tableau. Within beer, you're focused around the segments of beer. Within cider, the different flavours of cider. Old Moot alcohol free has done well. We've got that in the berries and cherries flavour. Absolutely, there's no reason why you couldn't expand that into other flavoured ciders which have been successful. But yeah, when you bring in spirits, getting into cocktails, getting into soft drinks, the world's your oyster. So yeah.
And I'm excited by the role that non-alc spirits can play in cocktails to create low alcohol cocktails. I think I'm still a big believer that absolutely the number of people that are giving up drinking or is going up, of course, and the number of people that are moderating drinking is going up. I think those people that are moderating probably, I'm one of them, but and I know there's a lot of people that, are out there actively trying to moderate. And I think that low category is really exciting, because I think people still, at the heart of it, people still want that little buzz that you get from alcohol. But they want to be able to get up in the morning, having had some nice drinks, and get on with their day and the million things that we've all got to do in our lives. So, where an espresso martini now might be 12-13% with a really tasty alcohol-free spirit in there, mixed with something else, bringing that ABV level down to sort of 5-6%. I think that's a real growth area, I think, for me. I don't know what you think on that, Gareth.
Yeah, I was going to say, David, I think it's a really interesting point, that kind of low mid-proof sort of type position. And I think it's overall is this, the future direction is, there's so much to be positive about in terms of opportunity and the creation of consumer occasion, of consumption occasion. Is that if you look at the investment, you've referenced Lyres a fair bit, David. Look at the investment in Lyres. You look at the investment in Partake in Canada. You look at the investment in Clean Liquor Co, Clean Co. They're 25% of our portfolio, our invested portfolio, is in the non-alc space, and that's before you get to the kind of low-proof spirited drinks. And when you start to look at the growth in the aperitif space, served with a tonic or a soda, and bringing that right down into that kind of low mid-proof space, an incredible amount of growth and opportunity and investment. And I think, I think that wider moderation, consumer search, the choice that consumers are looking for in that space is equally as exciting as what we're seeing, already in pure non-alc. So
I'm keen to get a sense for, in the beer world in particular, what product innovation is going to look like going forward, because much of what has come out in beer over the last few years has been really good, palatable 0 or 0.5% versions of core lager brands. What's next? As a big supplier, do you think you'll start to see more taking punts on creating their own low and no brands, for instance?
I think you probably will. Certainly, and I can't remember, somebody mentioned it earlier, having big brands, and brand is important. And so therefore Heineken 5% beer, Heineken normal strength beer, full strength beer, to some extent vouches for the 0.0, and there's right across in terms of positioning. So I certainly think it's a balance between them, but there's absolutely no barrier to small. And you see them particularly coming out of craft, the craft world, 0% specialist drinks. I think one challenge there is possibly, and we spoke about it a second ago, in terms of really focused on beer, that low alcohol does miss out on the functional benefit drinkers who are driving, and a lack of clarity on how many I can have. You're only then catering to the people who are looking to moderate their alcohol consumption rather than cutting it out. But so therefore that some extent keeps a specialist product in quite a small range, I guess. But certainly I don't see barriers to a 0% specialist beer getting scale if they can break out. The challenge is obviously getting scale and getting into consumers' minds, because absolutely, there are a number of people who are experimental enough to try lots of different things, and that's great, and they can get to drink some amazing stuff. But equally, there's a bunch of people who quite like stuff they've heard of, and it's getting that balance between the two.
Gareth, I've got a question for you about channels as a supplier. Over the coronavirus pandemic, one of the biggest stories we heard about was about D2C, and how as a route to consumers, it was finally coming into its own. What do you make of D2C's prospects for low and no?
I think it's I think it's proven over lockdown to be an incredible opportunity for non-alc spirits and outside non-alc, not non-alc category broadly. And I would actually probably capture online, inclusive of Amazon as well as D2C, because I think they play slightly different roles. You can see brands that are able to very closely start to learn and understand about who their consumer is and build brand equity through their direct platform and really get incredible data richness through their direct model, whilst building some scale on Amazon, and in a way that builds also interestingly outside of some of the traditional occasions of things like Dry January. You saw on Amazon non-alc spirits from March to May grow by in excess of 300%, 320 odd percent, driven by an incredibly strong Easter. So that, you can see brands are able to really start to drive scale through online retail, whilst really building brand and understanding their consumer through the direct model. I've referenced, actually, really interesting, I can't help myself with my background in beer to occasionally keep an eye on what's going on in the beer space as well. I noticed similarly at the start of summer, Lucky Saint, you referenced, Lucky Saint was the number 2 selling lager on Amazon, total lager. That's astonishing. That brand was set at the start of the year for a big on-premise launch. All geared up for a big on-premise launch going draft. Had that opportunity completely taken away, pivoted their focus and team into direct, set up a Shopify site in terms of brand building, and then Amazon in terms of supply. Number 2 selling total lager for a period of time. So, we see that, again, these founders and the quality of their brands that they're bringing through and tapping into the right lifestyle mixes, they're able to do something very unique through the D2C and the digital space. I think it's really interesting if you reference then the difference between a brand that's going Heineken 5.0, Heineken 0.0, and get sort of reading a bit analogous, Coke Zero. I want my 1 option, 2 option, versus brands that are then playing into the more clearly the kind of hedonistic well-being space, that are purely focused on an audience that is about well-being and wellness. And I look at lifestyle brands that do that exceptionally well. You're kind of Lululemon, Deliciously Ella. If you go into sort of snack bars, your protein bars of Fulfill and Grenade and the likes versus Snickers protein, they're just incomparable. They're completely different audiences, completely different consumers, and they build their brand channel mix very differently. But the D2C mix versus the traditional retail mix, and I think we'll see that very clearly in non-alc, that we'll see both in spirits but other categories, that D2C plays an incredibly important role for these brands that are building these lifestyle consumers.
The last question that I'd like to leave you with is, what do you think the biggest challenge is for low and no going forward? And I'll start with you, David.
I think we're well on the way there, aren't we? I think probably is the communication piece is, from an operator's perspective, my biggest challenge is getting the staff to fully understand the products, work with brands, get them in to ensure that they're properly explaining their products to the team. I think the majority of people, that are going to be engaging in this discussion are probably looking to moderate rather than give up. Is that a challenge? No, because they're going to be a lot more receptive to all the sorts of products that we've just discussed. So I don't see any major challenges. Obviously COVID and the kind of the tail of COVID, and maybe what that means to pubs purchasing over the coming months. Maybe that's probably a challenge actually. Pubs and pub groups that perhaps pre-COVID might have been more open to experimenting a bit more with the low and no categories. Maybe we'll play it a bit safer in the months to come straight after COVID. But aside from that, it's just heading one way, and it's just kind of how long it takes is how I feel about it. And I think that's the feeling I've got from this call, really, from the guys as well.
In some respects, I absolutely echo David's. I think the market is really nice set up. It's a long-term and growing consumer trend, so therefore the future is really, really positive for it. I think the key thing that suppliers need that brewers or spirit makers, distillers need to think about is how you build that magic. Because someone mentioned earlier on the call that alcohol gives you a little bit of a buzz, and that's some of the excitement of drinking a product with alcohol. If you don't have that, what's giving you that excitement? What's the serve? How are you making this special? And therefore the theatre of that drink becomes hugely important outside of the people who are functionally drinking it because they're driving, whatever. But the people who are choosing this A over B, what makes A exciting if it doesn't have alcohol in? So the serve, the pour, all the beauty and the romance that goes around it, I think is, and some of that will be in the comms and the story of the craft brewery or the distiller or whoever it is, but what makes that magic?
Yeah, I think, the same challenges, opportunities before COVID, are still the same now, which is kind of liquid excellence. It all starts with liquid excellence and giving consumers choice of something that, to Andy's point, that they don't want to compromise on. Yeah, so liquid excellence, absolutely start point. And then again, touched on by both the guys, consumer education and drinks experience. Yeah, those are the bits behind which we build brands. Yeah, and play with brand as opposed to play with price. And we've got to look at how the channels now enable us to do that. Yeah. So yeah, liquid excellence still absolutely the number one though.
Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me today.
That was cool. Lovely to meet you all guys virtually.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Daniel.